Hey, welcome to Bethel Online. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching us today, it's by no accident. We believe that God has something just for you. Here at Bethel, we believe that when real people like you and me, encounter the real Jesus, real change happens. So our hope and prayer for you is that you have an encounter with Jesus today. We also believe that God has a next step for all of us to take. Today, your step may just be watching this week's message. It could be asking God to forgive you and finally putting your hope and trust and faith in Jesus for the first time. Maybe it's being baptized or beginning to read through the Bible, whatever it is. We want to help you take that next step. You can let us know what step you're taking by texting the word online to 765-433-2004. We would love to walk with you. During this season, God is teaching us to be flexible. It seems like every week there's a new challenge and more changes. A great way to stay up to date on all the changes that's happening at Bethel is to follow us on social media. It's also a great way to listen to current and past Sunday morning messages. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Instagram. You can find us on all these platforms by searching Bethel Putco. Well, thanks again for tuning in online today. We want you to know that you are wanted, you are welcomed here, and that you are loved. I hope you have a great day. God bless.
Good morning and welcome to Bethel Online. We're so glad you joined us for the last week in our series, Gaining Ground. We've been in this series now for 7 weeks. Over the course of this series, we've continued to ask this question: how do we gain ground in our personal spiritual walk of faith, but how do we as a church gain ground? The church has a mission. The church is not a man-made idea. It's actually something that Jesus spoke into existence. Many people in Jesus' day had an idea about what they wanted Jesus to be doing. Many of the people wanted Jesus to have an uprising where they overtook the powerful government around and restored Israel to a place of power. Most people had ideas of where this event would come from and how it would happen, and they thought it would happen at the temple, or it would happen in a religious space, or it would be a political upheaval. But Jesus actually announces what he's doing and what he's here for in a very different place. In Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 20, there's this conversation between Jesus and his disciples, and it happens in a place that most wouldn't have expected Jesus to go. It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is? Who does everyone say that I am?" And Jesus is in the place of Caesarea Philippi, which is a place that was more noted for debauchery and sin. And actually, it's believed that he was likely in a place where people did pagan worship. And Jesus is talking to this broken group of disciples, this imperfect group of disciples with all their ideas about what he should be doing in a place that was really filled with brokenness. And he asks them this important question: who do people say that I am? Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. I find it interesting that they began to speculate by other people's thoughts. And yet they were experiencing Jesus, and he's in this moment where he's announcing his purpose. He asks again, who do you say that I am? That somehow it mattered to Jesus what these broken men thought he was about. I don't think it was because Jesus was having an identity crisis. I think it was that he knew they needed a clear picture of what he was doing. Simon Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, answered, "You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God." It's interesting because it seems usually when Simon Peter answers Jesus' questions that he's off base, that usually when Simon Peter gets an opportunity to tell Jesus what to do, he has his own ideas. And Jesus recognizes in this moment that he has understood what Jesus is there for. He may not understand fully what Jesus is doing, but he's recognized Jesus as the one who is doing all of the things that had been promised to God's people. And Jesus replied, "Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you, you did not learn this from any human being." What he was saying was, Simon Peter, God has revealed this to you. God has shown you this. This is not something you came upon by being smart or intelligent or having it all together. This is something that God has loved you enough to reveal to you. Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And in this moment, when Peter begins to understand that Jesus is the Messiah, Jesus begins to explain to him how him being Messiah might be different from what many had thought. When he calls him by the name Peter, he's actually changing Peter's name from a word that often refers to something that sways in the wind. In Peter's personality, we often see that Peter sways in the wind. He can't seem to go one direction for long. But now Jesus is declaring that his understanding of him as Messiah is giving Peter a new identity. And then he turns to Peter and he invites him to be a part of what he's doing. He says, "Upon this rock I will build my church." And many people have disputed over whether Jesus is talking to Peter in this particular case and saying, "Now, Peter, I'm going to build my church upon you." And many people have wondered if it's the actual rock place where Jesus was standing that was known as a place of sin. And the reality is, Jesus was doing both. He was giving Peter a new identity, and he was giving Peter a new purpose to begin to build his kingdom there. And he says, "Upon this rock I will build my church." The word for church is not about a building. The word for church that Jesus uses here is the word ecclesia, which means upon this rock I'll build my gathering of my people. Like Jesus is going about the work of building his kingdom, bringing together his people. And then he says this, all the powers of hell will not conquer it. Jesus is putting into place in this moment with a broken people in a broken place, his gathering of his people that will carry out his purpose and that the gates of hell will not win against. That's what Jesus was announcing there, but it's what he's calling us to do today. The church, as we know it, and the church that Jesus was talking about since 2,000 years ago has never really declined. In the world population, the main places where the church has been in decline is the United States, Australia, and Europe. In many parts of the world, the number of people who have become a part of this Big C church has never stopped growing. That's what we want to be about as a church. As a local body of believers, that's what we want to be about. Jesus then promises that he'll give the keys of the kingdom of heaven to give these guys the power to carry it out. On their own, these guys usually looked inadequate, not quite enough, not capable, but they've been invited to be a part of something with power beyond themselves. And that's the truth about you and I. If you're a part of a local body of believers, it's true about you. God has invited you to be a part of something that he has given great power and authority within this world. Jesus is calling you, if you're a part of a local church, Jesus is calling you to be a part of a bigger picture of what he's doing in building his kingdom. In Deuteronomy 11, verse 2, the scripture reminds us to remember what we've learned throughout our experiences with him. As we've gone through this series, we've learned some things that we need to know in order to gain ground in building the kingdom. Today, I want to revisit just a few of the things that we've learned. And these are key for us to be united in as a church as we move forward to gain ground. As we literally move forward to gain ground, to have a place that we are consistently using to minister and share the gospel. But things that we really need to remember as we go forward as a church. Deuteronomy 4:9 says, "Be careful to never forget what you've seen God doing for you. May his miracles have a deep and permanent effect on your lives. Tell your children and your grandchildren." So what have we learned over these past 7 weeks? What have we learned about God that we really need to remember and recall in order to gain ground as a church family? You've been invited the same way that Jesus was inviting his disciples into his family, into his gathering and his ecclesia. You've been invited to be a part of that. And if we're going to do that, if we're going to carry that out in the way that he called us to, we have to remember some things about God. Number one, God is in control. The time in which Jesus spoke about his church was a time of great chaos. It was a time where it was very unlikely that there would be a movement grow up that had anything to do with anything except for the Roman government. But in the middle of this circumstance, in a broken place, in a broken situation, Jesus spoke out the purpose of the church. And God, and he was true to his word that he was in control, that his Father was in control, that his Father was carrying out his purposes, and he was inviting to be a part of it. Psalm chapter 77, verse 14 says, "You are the God of miracles and wonders, and you demonstrate your awesome power." The church, we as a church, have been empowered with the power of God, that the same power that rose Jesus from the grave is alive in us. My prayer as our church moves forward is that the power of God be far more obvious than the strengths and abilities of men. That God does things despite us. The disciples who were there with Jesus that day when he announced the purpose of his coming, those men went on to do great things. They were faulted men. They were messed up men. And Jesus was taking something that was incredibly broken and doing something beautiful. And that's what he wants to do here in our local community. And that's what he wants to do with our church. And he wants to demonstrate his awesome power. My hope and my prayer for our church a few years down the road is not to hear us say, well, we did this and we did that, and we carried out this and we carried out that. It's to be able to look people in the face and say, we saw God show up in ways we cannot explain with human ability. Psalm 78 verse 7 says, "In this way, each generation has been able to set its hope anew on God and not forget his glorious miracles." The truth is, the seasons God has brought us through, the circumstances that God has brought us through, the places God has brought us out of, it has been a miracle what God has already done in the life of our church. Over 300 people have come to a new relationship with Jesus through the local work of the church, actually through the movement of the Holy Spirit in our local body. But we have an entire community of people, and I believe God wants to reach our local community. What else have we learned about God? We can't outgive him. That he, by his character and by his love, is an incredibly generous God. 2 Corinthians chapter 9 says this, "Remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously." God is able to make it up to you by giving you everything you need, and more so, there will not only be enough for your own needs, but plenty left over to give joyfully to others. We cannot outgive God. Jesus was asking these men to give their life to him, but he was only asking because he knew he would fully give himself for them. And that the miracle he was about to do for them was about to make a way where there was no way for them. We cannot outgive God. What God has already given us will far exceed what God was doing for his people and his gathering of followers was far more than could ever be done in return. We cannot outgive God. Something we've learned in this series, quite frankly, is just that God has been generous to us. And so not out of duty or need, but out of recognizing what God has done for us, we're called to be generous. What have we learned about ourselves? The truth is, what we devote ourselves to impacts our life. We grow through deeper commitment. My friends, I believe for Bethel Church, it's a season to step up to the plate, to take it to the next level, to grow, to move forward, to grow in our depth of knowing who God is. That was going to happen for all these men that Jesus was announcing his church to. They were going to grow, but they were not going to grow easily. They were going to have to grow despite of challenges. And we grow through commitment. It's just a fact of our life that things we commit to, we grow in. We grow in our commitment. What you commit to is what you will grow into. What you commit to practice will become what you do in real life. 2 Chronicles 16:9 tells us this, "For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him." As we try to gain ground in our personal walk of faith, as we try to gain ground in our local community to see others come to know Jesus and grow in an ever-changing life of following him, we need to know that God sees those who are fully committed to him and he's fully responsible for them. God calls us to a higher level of commitment. These men were following him around and he was largely taking care of things. He was making sure they were fed and cared for. And the reality is he would eventually die, raise from the dead, and go to heaven, and they would be left to, along with the Holy Spirit, to be his church. He was growing them. In the same way, faith by itself, James chapter 2 says, in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Faith is working the muscle. Faith is working, taking a step is often faith. We often think that somehow faith is tied to belief, but really faith is shown by our action. We can't outgive God. God's commitment to us was so great that when he looked upon us, he offered his son. We learned this, that God made us in his image in a way that when we are following him and living out his character, when we are showing by example who he is by the way we live our lives, that it's fulfilling, it's good to give. There's more happiness in giving than receiving, Acts 20, verse 35 says. In 1 Corinthians 8:2, they're talking about the early church, and it says, their joy was so great that they were extremely generous in their giving. What have we learned about our church family? Now, there is a big C church. When Jesus was talking about his followers in the church, he was talking about all of the people who were following him. And at that moment, there were these handful of people following him, his ecclesia. And eventually, these disciples go out and they began to go out and preach the word, and it began to grow the early church. And the early church was known by the incredible acts that God did through the broken people that he was reaching. The way God has done that historically, the way he was calling it into action, was in the local body of Christ, the local church. Is that literally, one of the things that we've learned about our local church is that this is a highly committed family. I tell my kids all of the time, you're a part of our family, so you help with the things that are important to our family. You don't do chores just for the sake of doing chores. You do chores because you're a part of our family. You help do the laundry, and you help do the dishes, and you feed the dog, and because you're a part of our family. Here at Bethel, we don't want to be halfway in and halfway out. The reality is that the Bible explicitly tells us not to be lukewarm, to be fully committed. At Bethel, we're going to strive as we move forward to gain ground, to be fully committed to our church family. In 2 Corinthians 8, verses 3 and 5, it talks about the early church, and it says, they gave as much as they could, even more than they could. Of their own free will, they pleaded. They saw this purpose that Jesus had called them to, and they were living it out, and they were doing so by giving of their own free will. They pleaded for the privilege of just having a part in helping God's people. They gave more than we could have hoped for, Paul said. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 7, it says, you people are leaders in so many ways, and you have so much faith and so many good preachers, so much learning, so much enthusiasm, so much love for us. Now I want you to be leaders also in the spirit of cheerful giving. That one of the ways that God will build his church is through the generosity of his people. We want to be fully committed in generosity. Number two, this is a loving and unified family. Many people have been hurt by church. Many churches have been split. And to be quite frank with you, one of the reasons why many people walk away is because they find church confusing. Friends, at Bethel, we want to be a loving and unified family. We want to love our neighbor. We want to love each other. The scripture says that they will know that we are Jesus's by the way that we love one another. They will know us by our love, not by our strong opinions. They will know that we are loved not by our political stance. They will know that we are loved by the way we love each other, by the way that we love the other neighbors, our other people outside of our church. Our church will be known by its generosity and love in the local community. We are going to strive to be a church of generosity because we believe when people see sacrificial giving, they can understand a Jesus who was willing to be sacrificed on the cross in their behalf and meet the God who loves them. This is going to be a loving and unified family. We will fight for unity. How were they unified in the early church? We hear these stories of how they shared their lives together and the church grew. And I can't help but imagine that everyone had different ideas and different opinions, but I think they were all unified by the fact that they had joined because they believed in the resurrected Jesus, and they knew that people's understanding and meeting the resurrected Jesus was far more important than anything else. In Matthew chapter 18, verse 19 and 20, it talks about the unity that can happen just between two people. It says, if two of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where there are two or three come together in my name, there I am with them. That there is a power in unity in God's purpose. The Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language they will have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. The scripture talks about the early church, and it says in Acts 2, verse 42 through 47, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. They devoted themselves. Devoted and commitment are hard, and they are rare. But they're also things that help people see Jesus. As a church, let's be devoted together to a common purpose, to see other people know Jesus, to walk alongside Jesus together. We so often want other people to think like us and act like us, but the truth is our thinking really gets in line when we're all unified in seeking God. It says, everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. You know what that means? They were gaining ground. Can you imagine, in the world we live in this day and age, what it would mean for our community to be filled with awe at the wonders and signs happening because Jesus was walking with a group of people and a people was walking with Jesus? It says all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. They were gaining ground. There are a lot of ideas about church and what should happen with church, but I really believe God sent His church. He announced His church, and He promised that His church, when it is faithful, will gain ground. I don't believe there's some crazy formula. I believe the Bible lays it out. So what now? 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 11 says this, having started, and this is a paraphrase, not a translation. It says, having started the ball rolling so enthusiastic, you should carry this project through to completion just as gladly, giving whatever you can out of whatever you have. Let your enthusiastic idea at the start be equated by your realistic action now. Now here's the reality. We've been in this series and we've shared that our church is looking to purchase a piece of property, and we believe we found a piece of property, and that our next step is to purchase that property. The reality is we're not purchasing that property because we want a piece of property. We aren't purchasing a piece of property because we think the purpose of our life is to own a piece of property. The reality is we want to carry out what Jesus called into action in the book of Matthew when He stood in a broken place with broken people and gave them a purpose and a power to go out to the world and gain ground. Church, it's time. Can we gain ground? Now here's the thing. You have a personal responsibility as an individual to be gaining ground in your walk of faith by being faithful and committed. You have a personal responsibility to the other believers in your local church to be faithful in your action and your love for others. And we as a church need to continue moving forward in carrying out what Jesus called us to do and empowered us to do. Let's go gain ground. I love you, Bethel, and have a great week.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Are you ready to take your next step? We would love to hear from you. You can send an email to hello@bethel.us. You can send us a message on Facebook, or you can let us know in the Bethel app. And speaking of the Bethel app, take a moment, if you haven't already, to go to your app store and search Bethel Putco to download our app. There's all kinds of great resources in the app. You can listen to messages, you can view the messages for Sunday morning, and you can also fill out a digital Connect card. You can do that today and each week to let us know that you're tuning in. You can also find some great information about our Bethel Kids Ministry and our Be the One student ministries. Also in the app, you can give. It's one of 3 ways you can give, with online giving at bethel.us/give, in our app, Bethel Putco, or through text. Hey, thanks again for joining us. We hope you have a great day and know that you are loved.